And so we're really cautious with our pitchers early in the season. And I think that does lead maybe to a couple of extra losses. I can think of 2 games specifically last year that we lost that we may have won had I extended our starters.
Welcome to another episode of the Cornerstone Coaching Academy podcast, where you will get expert, practical baseball coaching advice you can take directly to your next practice. Let's get started. Here's your host, Coach Kyle Nelson.
All right, coaches, welcome back to another episode of the Cornerstone Coaching Academy podcast. I'm your host, Coach Kyle Nelson. Welcome to our show today on 8 ways that you can have your team playing their best baseball at the end of next season. So I know that we are deep into the planning phase for a lot of people, getting ready for fall ball, looking at some of the things we can do in the winter to improve our team maybe, and then maybe having some philosophy changes as well along the way. And so these 8 things, some of them are things that are philosophy changes, and some of them are things that you can actually implement in your program to help them kind of build towards the end of the season instead of peak early in the season. Since for a lot of us, high school coaches, college coaches, a lot of our most important games are in fact at the end of the season. We want to make sure that our players are strong, fresh, and ready to go for those games. For those of you who are new listeners to the podcast, what you're going to get is about 15 to 20, maybe 25 minutes of a really specific, actionable topic that you can take back to your team, to your program, to your travel ball team, and improve them right away in your next practice. Implement a new philosophy, implement a new drill, something like that. That's what we're trying to do for you, is to give you some really actionable things that you can take back immediately. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play. I also put all of the episodes up on YouTube and Vimeo as well, so you can subscribe to us there and get all of our content and all of our podcast episodes regardless of your medium of choice for taking in podcasts. You can also go to our blog, cornerstonecoachingacademy.com/blog, where you can find articles about just about any aspect of the game. Also, all of our podcast episodes with the show notes go up there too. And for those of you that are really, really interested in improving your team, your program next season, you can check out Cornerstone Elite. It is where we put all of our outstanding resources, all of our practice plans, all of our drills, including our 47 chaos hitting drills that help translate from practice into game performance. So you can check that out by going to www.cornerstonecoachingacademy.com/cornerstone-elite. Let's go ahead and get started with today's show then. Again, the topic for today is 8 ways that you can help your team play their best baseball at the end of the season. And for me, at the beginning of the year, that is always my biggest goal for our team, as far as on the field, is that when we look at what we're doing at the end of the season compared to what we did at the beginning of the season, that we are better in just about every aspect of the game. And what I found is that one of the ways that I was kind of sabotaging that a little bit was with the workload that we were putting on our players and some of the demands. So I'll get into that as I go through these 8 tips. The first thing to do is to start with the end in mind. And so thinking about the season, it's not that we have to be necessarily ready for game 1. I used to think about getting the team ready for game 1. And, we have to get everything done. We have to be perfect at everything. We have to have our cuts and relays perfect, our bunt defense is perfect, we have to have our first and third defenses perfect when we come on the field game 1. And I've gone just a little bit away from that, and I'm looking at it more now like a gradual crescendo throughout the season, where I want the team to be perfect and ready, as perfect as we can get, once we get into conference play, and then build more on that. And once we get to the postseason, that's when we want to be truly refined. And so what that's led me to do is to spend a little bit less time early on some of those team concepts, and to kind of start developing early on more of our hitting, pitching, fielding, things like that, and understanding that those team concepts, the things that show up sometimes in games as, this team, they weren't ready for that first and third defense. Well, we may not have it perfect on April 1st, but we're going to be way better at it on May 15th. And so that's kind of the view I've taken, is that I'm starting with the end in mind, and where do I want our players to be on May 15th, and what are some of the things I have to do to get there. Another thing that we have done, so tip number 2, is that you may lose a few extra games along the way. And this more has to do with your pitching staff, I think, than anything, because a lot of times what coaches will do is early in the season, if they're treating those games, those first handful of games, as do or die, win and loss, a lot of times they're going to overthrow some of their better pitchers early in the game, or early in the season, and if it doesn't immediately lead to an injury, then it certainly can lead to excess wear and tear on them throughout the season. And so what we do is we build our pitchers up very gradually, with the understanding that pitching in a bullpen session is not the same as pitching in a game. So if you get a kid up to 80 pitches in a bullpen session, that doesn't probably mean that he is physically ready to go with 80 pitches in a game. So his first outing, he may be capped at 60 pitches, because we also have warm-up, we also have in between innings, and the stress that's going to be put on the arm is going to be a little bit more, because they're probably putting a little more effort into it early in this in game than they do in their bullpens. And so we're really cautious with our pitchers early in the season, and I think that does lead maybe to a couple of extra losses. I can think of 2 games specifically last year that we lost that we may have won had I extended our starters out past their pitch limit. I think our first starter was at 60, and our next one was at 60 as well. And they made it through 3 and 4 innings. And if I had extended them a little bit farther outside of that, probably they were going to be fine and throw the ball well in those next couple of innings. But I'm not so sure that they would have built throughout the season. And those starters were definitely their best when we got to the playoffs last year. And so I think that that's a really, really good thing, especially for a lot of young coaches who look at each game as a do or die thing, is to realize that this is a marathon and not a sprint. Tip number 3 is to really focus on warm-up and recovery routine with your pitchers. Make it something you do daily. Again, our goal for them is to be the strongest at May 15th, or whenever that time of year is for you, not to have them be worn out on May 15th. And so we really made sure this year, and I will leave a link to our pitcher first practice, and then also to our yellow, green, and red podcast that I did, where I explain a little bit about how we went about managing our pitchers' workload. But the thing that we focused on more than anything else with them was having a proper warm-up and a proper recovery each and every day. And that way we made sure that they were getting what they needed, and they were going to be as healthy as they could at the end of the season. A new one that we implemented a couple years ago, and then sometimes things just don't go as planned, right? We didn't do it as accurately as I would have liked to this past season, but every Friday we had our players weigh in throughout the season. And what we were looking for was, we were trying to make sure that we were not losing weight throughout the season. We did last year have some players lose some pretty significant weight throughout the season. There's a number of reasons for this. And I'm not talking about players who are overweight and could use to lose a couple of pounds. I'm talking about the players who are in good shape. They've spent the off season getting their bodies ready, and then they get into the season and all of a sudden they drop from 185 pounds. And when your games are most important, now they're at 175 pounds because they've lost muscle, they've had a tough time with their diet. So we monitor our players' weights. We're going to try to do a better job of that this year, each Friday having them weigh in. And if we notice a player starting to lose weight, we're going to talk to them a little bit about their diet, find out what they're eating, how much they're eating, and how they can get more food in their diet, which actually leads us directly into our 6th tip for playing your best baseball at the end of the year. Our 5th tip, and that is stressing the importance of sleep and nutrition. I think it is really difficult for players in season to find a way to eat enough food. If you think about a player's schedule, and if they just eat when they're supposed to, they're probably getting to the end of your game each day having consumed somewhere around 1,000 to 1,200 calories, right? A lot of kids don't eat breakfast. We know that they should, especially athletes. There's a lot of people out there doing the intermittent fasting thing. That's great for guys like me who'd like to drop a few pounds, but athletes, especially high school aged athletes, really do not need to do anything like that. And so if they're eating dinner at 8 o'clock at night, then they're probably, a lot of them are eating until their lunch the next day, which might be 11 o'clock or noon. They're probably going to eat, somewhere between 800 to 1,000 calories. They might have bring a little snack with them. But a lot of times our players, by the time we get to the end of the game at, 7 o'clock, 7:30 at night, a lot of them have not eaten in 6, 7, or 8 hours, depending on when their lunch is. And so really stressing the idea of nutrition, making sure we're getting good food, but mostly with in-season athletes, it's just making sure they're getting enough food. So they have to try to prepare. And as a coach, I know some people have gone so far as to, make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for their teams before games, things like that. If you want to do that and you have the resources to do that, I think that would be a really good idea. But also just kind of talking with players about it and stressing the importance of making sure that they get enough food, bringing a couple of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches each day, or bringing an extra lunch, packing 2 lunches with them so they can eat one at lunch and then one after school, just making sure that they have enough calories in them when they get to the game time. That's also going to help maintain their weight and maintain their strength throughout their season. So I think that the nutrition piece is huge for them. And then the real one that is extremely difficult during the season is sleep, especially on nights when you have road games. We sometimes get back at 8:30 at night. Kids have homework, and then they are, they're up at the 6:15 the next morning because we start school at 7:15. So it's really, really difficult for them to get that sleep. So what we've tried to do is explain and talk about how important it is to be productive when they have free time. We need to make sure we're taking advantage of any study halls that we have so that when we get home late at night, we don't have that extra homework and we can get a good meal and get to sleep. We also need to make sure that when it's time to do homework, that we're putting devices away, that we're not, getting distracted, so that we can get that done, get it done well, and then get to sleep at a reasonable hour. It is incredibly difficult, I think, for in-season athletes to get enough sleep and to make sure that they are keeping up with their homework while we are traveling and getting home late several times per week. Kind of again leads into the next point number 6, and that is that days off are okay. I used to be, when I was younger, really, I would like push the pedal to the metal, and I always thought if you hit the gas, it's always better. And what I've realized as I've gone through is that kids get wore out. They have a lot of things taking them in different directions. They have baseball, they have school, they have friends, they have family, and they only have so much that they can give before something starts to decrease, something starts to suffer. And a lot of times what's going to suffer is going to be their performance on the field, because mentally they're not fresh. And so I think it's okay to give days off, with the understanding that, when we give days off, we'll say something like this: we're going to give you tomorrow off. We have a really important stretch of games coming up, along with a lot of road games. We're giving you tomorrow off so you can rest and recover and make sure that you get things caught up with your homework. So you try to go home, you get your homework done, and you get ahead as far as you can in any of your classes. And what that's going to do, if they do that, is that is going to relieve some of the stress coming up for them with that, heavy schedule that you've got coming up, especially if you've got a lot of road games there. I do think I used to never want to give days off. I looked at days off as a sign of weakness, and now I think it's that a couple of really, really well-timed days off during your season can refresh them mentally, can refresh them physically, and they can hopefully get other things in their life that they've been kind of torn away from, and they can get those kind of settled. Maybe they spend some time with family, which they maybe haven't had a chance to do that much during your season. They get ahead on homework, things like that. But again, you've got to communicate with them, because if you just give them the day off, and you say, hey, do whatever you want, then chances are they may not be very, very productive. And they may not be productive anyway, some of them, but at least you've made that idea of here's what we're doing and why we're doing it. Point number 7 of ways to help your team play their best baseball at the end of the season is that player development does not stop when the game starts. So a lot of times once games start, and I had this philosophy for sure when I was younger, even up till a couple years ago, once games started, it was like, well, we're just now trying to play and compete in games, and our practices are going to be more team oriented because those are the things that we're seeing. And a lot of times we neglected things like batting practice, but we didn't look at them as a way of developing players. Whereas now I look at like our batting practice in season and I say, okay, our player development is not stopping just because our games have started. So we're still going to be trying to put them in situations with constraints, put them in drills that are going to address weaknesses that they have, and trying to improve them throughout the season. What we're going to stay away from is that like over-coaching, internal cueing to the point where they're in their own head so much that they can't think and hit at the same time. We want them to, we want to set up drills, we want to set up things for them that are going to specifically address those weaknesses by using more external cues in the season so that they're not thinking about their hands, their elbow, when they're out on the mound or when they're in the box. If you are an elite member and you want to check out our newest course on recognizing, diagnosing, and fixing common hitting flaws, I think that one fits really nicely with this idea of in-season player development and the ability to use a lot of external cueing and a lot of constraints and a lot of different drills in order to keep player development going throughout your season. And the last thing that we are going to do, the 8th way that we are going to keep our team playing their best baseball at the end of the season, is we are going to continue to lift weights during the season with the idea of still trying to get stronger. The reality is they probably won't get stronger because of one of the things we mentioned about their training economy and they're being pulled in so many different directions, that the idea of them being able to get stronger is simply just, it's going to be difficult. But if we go in with the idea that we're going to maintain strength, we're probably going to lose it. And then by the end of the year, when we've worked so hard in the off season to get stronger, we're more mobile, more explosive. And then by the end of the year, we're going to be less strong, less explosive, less mobile than we were at the beginning. So by trying to increase it, we hope that we can maintain it with most of our players, and that also they're going to, maybe some of them will actually be stronger at the end of the year. But we have to be careful with this one because in season is a little bit different than our out of season lifting. What we do is we have weightlifting classes in our school. And fortunately, I run the class that a lot of our varsity players are in. And so I get to be hands-on with them during the season. But what we try to do is we try to keep our weight up. We want them still lifting heavy weight while we decrease our volume, or the number of sets and reps that they do in season. We want to make sure that we keep the weight up so that they stay strong. But what's going to really kill them in season is, if we're doing like 5 sets of 12, or if we're doing, 8 sets of 5, really, really high volume, that's going to crush them in season. So we want to try to stay low volume, but still keep that strength up. So they're going to be lifting 3 to 4 times a week in that class. It's only about a 25 to 30 minute lift because our classes are about 50 minutes. So by the time they get out of the locker room, they get their movement prep done, and then they get their lift in. It's about 25, 30 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week. Our players that do not take our weightlifting classes, after practice 2 to 3 times a week, usually our goal is twice. They're going to get a quick 30-minute, low volume, high intensity, not like a HIIT training, but a high percent of 1 RM lift in for about 30 minutes, about 2 to 3 times a week. Again, we want to be respectful of their time, but we do know that they need to keep their strength up in season, so we want to make sure that they are getting what they need in the weight room as well without overburdening and overtaxing their time. That is also another way that we kind of try to get kids into those weightlifting classes, because they know that if they're in the weightlifting class, they don't have to stay for that extra 35 minutes after practice a couple times per week. So those are our 8 tips for playing your best baseball at the end of the season. You're going to start with the end in mind. You're going to lose a few extra games because you're going to be careful with your pitchers early on. We're going to focus on warm-up and recovery routine with our pitchers every single day. You're going to monitor players' weight throughout the season so that you can see players who need to eat more, see players who aren't getting enough lifting in. We're going to stress the importance of sleep and nutrition and show them what that looks like and give them specific examples and ways that they can do that. We are going to give them a few extra days off so that they can refresh, recharge their batteries, get ahead on their coursework. We are going to make sure that player development does not stop when games start, and we are going to lift weights during the season so that they are just as strong at the end as they were at the beginning. So that's the eight things we're going to do. If you'd like a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these things, like our red, yellow, green pitching program, or what do I mean when I'm talking about our chaos hitting drills, go ahead and check out Cornerstone Elite. It has absolutely everything that we do, everything, all the drills, all the practice plans, courses. It has everything we do in there, videos, discussions about different topics in youth, amateur baseball, and you can go ahead and check that out at www.cornerstonecoachinacademy.com/cornerstone-elite. So next week we'll be back with another episode. Have a wonderful week and never stop learning.
Thanks for listening to the Cornerstone Coaching Academy podcast. If you liked what you heard here and you're looking to take your team, your program, and your coaching career to the next level, there is no better resource than a Cornerstone Elite membership. Get everything you need to run an amateur team, including dozens of drills, games, practice plans, e-courses, and much more, right at your fingertips, wherever you have an internet connection. Check it out today at cornerstonecoachingacademy.com/cornerstone-elite. We will be back next week with another great episode on the Cornerstone Coaching Academy podcast.